A millionaire is saved by a former soldier living on the streets. A discovered symbol reveals an unexpected connection. Secrets from the past threaten to ruin their lives and reputations. A man betrayed by the system challenges a powerful network. Rain lashed the streets of New York City as Richard Miller left the charity event at the Metropolitan Opera House. The 45-year-old businessman adjusted his umbrella, watching the droplets ricochet off the asphalt under the yellowish light of the street lamps. His thoughts were still on the substantial donations he had made to the city's social projects, a way of giving back after the success his technology company had achieved in recent years. He decided to walk the short distance to his car, parked a few blocks away. The city center was practically deserted at that hour, with only a few hurried pedestrians seeking shelter from the storm. Richard had always appreciated these moments of solitude, when he could reflect on his accomplishments and plan his next steps. As he walked, a suspicious movement caught his attention. 3 men emerged from the shadows of an alley, blocking his path. Their faces were partially covered, and their intentions didn't seem friendly. Richard felt his heart race, but he maintained his composure. Years of tough negotiations had taught him the importance of staying calm under pressure. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said, trying to pass by the group. One of the men, the tallest, stepped forward. "Richard Miller," he pronounced the name as if it were a sentence. "You should have stayed out of this." Before Richard could respond, the men advanced. The businessman backed away but found only the cold wall of the alley behind him. The umbrella slipped from his hands, falling into a puddle of water. At that moment, when all seemed lost, a figure emerged from the shadows. The movement was so fast that Richard could barely process what happened. In a matter of seconds, the 3 assailants were on the ground, subdued by a man who seemed to have emerged from the storm itself. His clothes were worn, his graying hair was soaked, but his movements demonstrated a military precision that contrasted with his homeless appearance. The attackers, realizing they had lost the advantage, quickly fled, leaving Richard alone with his mysterious savior. The businessman caught his breath, observing the man who remained on alert, as if expecting a counterattack. I don't know how to thank you," Richard managed to say, still processing what had happened. "My name is Richard Miller." The man hesitated for a moment before responding. "Michael," he said simply, his hoarse voice indicating he wasn't accustomed to conversation. Richard observed his savior more closely. Despite the worn clothes and unshaven face, there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of intelligence and dignity that didn't match his current condition. The businessman made an instant decision, guided by both gratitude and curiosity. "Michael, do you need a place to shelter from this rain? I know a hotel nearby where you could spend the night." Michael frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the offer. "I don't need charity, sir." "It's not charity," Richard insisted. "It's a thank you. You just saved me from something that could have been much worse. Let me repay you somehow." After a long moment of silence, interrupted only by the sound of rain, Michael nodded slightly. Richard realized that this simple gesture seemed to cost him great effort, as if accepting help was more difficult than facing 3 men in a dark alley. As they walked towards the hotel, Richard couldn't help but think about the surreal circumstances of that encounter. How had a man with such skill and training ended up on the streets? What had led him to this situation? And why had Richard been attacked in the first place? The businessman didn't know it, but that rainy night would mark the beginning of a journey that would forever change his life, and that of his mysterious savior. As the storm continued to punish the city, the 2 men, coming from completely different worlds, began to weave the first threads of a story that would reveal long-buried secrets and painfully guarded truths. The Continental Hotel in the heart of New York City wasn't accustomed to receiving guests like Michael. The staff cast discreetly suspicious glances when Richard checked in for the room, but the businessman ignored the surprised expressions. After ensuring Michael was settled, Richard handed him his business card. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, if you want, we can talk more. I have a proposal to make." Michael accepted the card in silence, his alert eyes studying every detail of the corridor, every possible exit, a behavior that didn't go unnoticed by Richard. There was something methodical, almost automatic, in his way of assessing the environment. The next morning, Richard had barely arrived at his office when his secretary announced Michael's arrival. The man was clean and shaved, wearing the same clothes from the night before, but now dry and pressed. The transformation was remarkable, but what stood out most was his posture, erect, disciplined, reminiscent of a military man at ease. "I appreciate the hospitality," Michael began, "but I can't accept any more help." Richard gestured for him to sit. "Before you refuse, I'd like you to hear me out. I have a vacant penthouse in the building where I live. It's an employee apartment that's been unoccupied for months. You could stay there while you get back on your feet." Michael remained silent, his face an impenetrable mask. Richard continued, "In exchange, I'd like to hire you as a security consultant. After what happened yesterday, I realized I need to reassess my personal protection." "You don't know anything about me," Michael responded, a note of warning in his voice. "I know you have military training, your way of moving, your technique. That's not learned on the streets." Richard leaned forward. "And I know you chose to help me when you could have simply ignored the situation." A muscle twitched in Michael's face. "There are things in my past, situations that you're better off not knowing about. We all have a past, Michael. What interests me is the present and how we can move forward." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah, Richard's 28-year-old daughter. She entered the office with her usual energy, but stopped when she saw Michael. Her eyes widened slightly, and Richard noticed a sudden tension in the air. "Sorry, Dad. I didn't know you were in a meeting," she said, her eyes still fixed on Michael, who had stood up the moment she entered. "Sarah, this is Michael. He helped me last night with a complicated situation." Richard made the introductions, closely observing both of their reactions. "Nice to meet you," Sarah responded automatically, but there was something in her tone that Richard couldn't decipher. "I just came to drop off the documents you asked for about the new partnerships." She placed a folder on the desk and quickly left, leaving a heavy silence in the office. Michael seemed even tenser than before. "Your daughter works with you?" he asked, his voice controlled. "Yes, she coordinates our social projects. Sarah has a strong sense of justice, sometimes too much." Richard smiled proudly. "She's always pushing me to ensure the company maintains ethical practices at all levels." Michael nodded slowly, as if processing the information. After a moment of reflection, he finally responded to the earlier proposal. "I accept your offer, Mr. Miller, but with one condition. If at any point you feel that my presence brings more risks than benefits, I want you to tell me immediately." Richard extended his hand, sealing the deal. "Agreed, and please call me Richard." As they settled the details of the arrangement, Richard couldn't help but think about his daughter's reaction. Sarah had always been perceptive, able to read people with an almost frightening accuracy. Her reaction upon seeing Michael suggested that she had noticed something he still couldn't see. What Richard didn't know was that this seemingly simple agreement would be just the first step in a journey that would reveal surprising connections between past and present, testing loyalties and forcing all involved to confront long-buried truths. Meanwhile, in her office in the same building, Sarah opened her laptop, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard as she considered whether or not to research more about the mysterious man who was now entering her father's life. The next morning, Richard found a brown envelope on his desk. Inside were old company documents dated from before his management, when his father still ran the business. Among them, contracts with foreign companies displayed discrete military symbols in the headers. Most intriguing was a series of transfers to seemingly non-existent companies. "Charlie," Richard called his CFO over the intercom, "can you come to my office?" While waiting, he began organizing the documents, noticing a pattern in the transfer dates. They all coincided with periods of instability in conflict regions around the world. His father had never mentioned military connections, but now looking back, certain decisions began to make a disturbing sense. Charlie entered the office, nervously adjusting his glasses. "About those documents, Richard, I was surprised myself when I found them in the dead files. Why were these contracts never mentioned before? Your father, he had a particular way of conducting business. Some partnerships were kept secret for strategic reasons." Richard frowned. Strategic reasons, or legal reasons, Charlie? Before the CFO could answer, Sarah burst into the room, her face a mask of concern. Dad, we need to talk, it's about Michael. Charlie took advantage of the interruption to discreetly withdraw, leaving father and daughter alone. Sarah closed the door and sat down, her tablet in hand. What did you find out? Richard asked, recognizing his daughter's determined expression. Michael isn't just an ex-military. He was part of a special operation in 2015, Operation Guardian, a mission that went terribly wrong. Richard felt a weight in his stomach. Go on. He was a decorated soldier, Dad, but he was accused of treason during the mission. The accusation said he had sold information that compromised the operation. Sarah paused, her eyes finding the documents on her father's desk. And you know what's most interesting? One of the companies mentioned in the operation reports has the same name that appears on these old contracts. Richard looked again at the papers on his desk, a new understanding dawning. Are you suggesting our company was involved? Not directly, Sarah answered. But the contracts you're investigating, they're part of a larger network. A network that connects private companies to questionable military operations. That's why you were so suspicious of him, Richard murmured. Dad, you need to understand. Michael may not be who we think, and now he has full access to our security. Richard stood up, walking to the window. Down below, he could see Michael talking with the security team, his military bearing evident even from a distance. Have you confronted him about this? Sarah shook her head. Not yet, but there's more. I found records of recent transfers, similar to those in the old contracts. Someone inside the company is still maintaining these connections active. Charlie, Richard murmured. He found these documents very conveniently. Exactly. And now, with Michael here... Sarah left the sentence hanging. Richard turned to his daughter. What do you suggest? We need to find out the truth about Michael, but more than that, we need to understand how our company got involved in all this. There could be serious consequences if these connections come to light. At that moment, the secretary announced over the intercom that Michael was requesting an urgent meeting. Richard and Sarah exchanged tense looks. Let him in, Richard decided, while Sarah quickly put away her tablet. Michael entered the room, his eyes quickly registering Sarah's presence and the documents on the desk. His posture was even stiffer than normal. Mr. Miller, during my security assessment, I found something you need to see immediately. He hesitated, looking at Sarah. In private, if possible. Sarah stood up, but before leaving, she gave her father a significant look. At the door, she paused briefly. Michael, she called, do you know something called Operation Guardian? Michael's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed a flash of recognition. Some ghosts, he responded calmly, are better left resting, Miss Miller. After Sarah's exit, Michael approached Richard's desk, his eyes fixed on the exposed documents. I see the ghosts have already started to awaken, he murmured, more to himself than to Richard. The silence in Richard's office was dense as Michael observed the documents on the desk. His fingers lightly brushed the yellowed paper, tracing the military symbols printed on the header. You must be wondering why a decorated soldier ended up on the streets, Michael finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of painful memories. Richard leaned forward in his chair. I'm more interested in knowing why my company appears in documents related to your last mission. Operation Guardian, Michael pronounced the words as if they were bitter. A mission that was supposed to be simple. Protect a humanitarian convoy. At least that's what we were told. But it wasn't. Michael shook his head. The convoy was carrying more than medical supplies. There were documents, contracts, evidence of a corruption network that connected private companies to questionable military operations. He paused. When I discovered the truth, I tried to alert my superior, Colonel Xavier. That was my first mistake. Richard picked up one of the contracts. And what was the second? Trusting the system. I believed that by following official channels, the truth would come out. Instead, I was accused of treason. Xavier ensured that all evidence pointed to me. Why are you telling me this now? Michael took a flash drive from his pocket. because I found this during my security assessment. These are records of recent transfers using the same patterns as the old contracts. Your company is still connected to this network, Mr. Miller, even if you don't know it. Richard accepted the flash drive with hesitation. Charlie, he must be involved. He found these old documents very conveniently. Not just him, Michael responded. Your daughter, she's investigating these connections, isn't she? That's why her distrust when she saw me. Richard nodded slowly, the pieces starting to fit together. Sarah coordinates our social projects, but in recent months she has been increasingly involved with a group of activists. They investigate companies suspected of unethical practices. She's in danger, Michael stated categorically. If she's close to exposing these connections, they won't hesitate to silence her. At that moment, as if summoned by the conversation, Sarah burst back into the room. Her face was pale and she was clutching her phone tightly. Dad, I just received some information. Those old contracts, there are more of them, many more, and there's something you need to see. She connected her tablet to the room's monitor, displaying a series of scanned documents. These are records from a company called Global Shield Solutions, on the surface an international security consultancy, in reality a front for much darker operations. Michael approached the monitor, his eyes fixed on the images. I know this company. They provided consultancy for our unit during Operation Guardian. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. And you know who one of the main shareholders is, Charlie Vaughan. Richard felt his blood run cold. My CFO. Since before you took over the company, Dad, he kept this connection hidden through a network of shell companies. The contracts he discovered were just the tip of the iceberg. Michael frowned. How did you get this information? Sarah hesitated for a moment. I work with an independent investigation group. We've been tracking connections between private companies and irregular military operations for months. The Truth Exposed group, Michael completed, surprising Sarah. I've heard about your work. How? My daughter, Michael revealed, his voice softening. Anna. She works with you. The shock on Sarah's face was evident. Anna is your daughter. She never mentioned... We grew apart after the incident. She believed the official version about my alleged betrayal. I don't blame her. Richard watched the interaction, realizing the layers of connections being revealed. So your own daughter is investigating the network that destroyed your life, without knowing about your innocence? Before Michael could answer, Sarah's phone rang again. Her expression changed as she read the message. Anna. She discovered something big. She set up a meeting for tonight at Central Park. Said it's urgent. Michael stood up abruptly. It's a trap. They must have discovered the connection between you two. How can you be sure? Sarah questioned. Because that's how they got me. An urgent meeting, crucial information. When I arrived at the location, I found only enemies waiting. Richard picked up his phone. I'll alert security. No, Michael interrupted him. If there's a traitor in the company, we need to act discreetly. Miss Miller, respond normally to the message. Confirm the meeting. The accusation against my father was fabricated. Xavier sighed theatrically. Impressive how you put the pieces together. But you know what's more impressive? How intelligent people can be so predictable. He made a subtle gesture, and his men began to approach. Michael assumed a defensive position, his years of training instinctively surfacing. Anna, Sarah, get out of here, he ordered. Richard, take them to a safe place. Dad, no, Anna protested. I won't abandon you again. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching sirens. Xavier frowned, clearly displeased. I alerted the police as soon as we arrived, Richard revealed. And I sent copies of all the documents to various journalists. If anything happens to us, the truth will come out. Xavier studied the group for a long moment, evaluating his options. The sirens were getting louder by the second. This conversation isn't over, he warned, before making another gesture for his men to retreat. As Xavier and his men disappeared into the growing darkness of the park, Anna hesitantly approached her father. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Dad, forgive me, I should have believed you. Michael hugged his daughter, years of pain and longing dissolving in that moment. Sarah watched the scene, holding the military medal that Michael had entrusted to her earlier. "Here," she extended, the medal to Anna. "I think this belongs to you two," the sirens now echoed at the park entrance. Richard looked at the group, aware that this night was just the beginning of a long journey in search of truth and justice. In Richard's penthouse, the group gathered to process the night's events. Anna sat close to her father, as if fearing he might disappear again. Michael occasionally glanced at her, still barely believing in their reunion. "We need to organize everything we know," Sarah began, spreading documents across the dining table. "Anna, you mentioned a meeting happening in 3 days. Anna nodded, opening her laptop. "It's a board meeting for Global Shield. Charlie will be there along with other important executives. They call it a shareholders meeting, but it's really a gathering to coordinate their operations." Richard examined the list of participants. "I recognize some names here. These are people who used to do business with my father." "Did your father know?" Michael asked gently, "about the true nature of these operations?" Richard ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture of frustration. "Honestly, I don't know. He was always reserved about certain aspects of the business. Said there were some things I was better off not knowing." "Dad," Anna addressed Michael, her voice hesitant. "Why did you never try to find me, to explain the truth?" Michael was silent for a moment, weighing his words. "At first, I tried. But you were so hurt, so convinced of my guilt. Later, when I ended up on the streets, I thought it would be better for you to live your life without the burden of my failure." "It wasn't a failure," Sarah interjected. "You chose to do the right thing, even knowing you'd pay a high price for it." Anna picked up the military medal that was on the table, her fingers tracing the inscriptions. "I remember the day I gave you this. You had just returned from a mission, and I was so proud." "You still can be," Richard affirmed. "Your father is a man of principles, something rare these days." The moment was interrupted by Sarah's cell phone. It was a message from one of her contacts in the investigation group. "You need to see this," she said, connecting her phone to the living room TV. "These are emails exchanged between Charlie and Xavier in recent months. They were planning something big." The messages revealed a complex operation. Global Shield was preparing to expand its activities, using legitimate companies as a front for questionable operations. "They mention a Phoenix project," Anna pointed out, "but there are no specific details." Michael approached the screen, his eyes narrowed. "That name, it was a code we used during Operation Guardian. It meant a complete restructuring, eliminating all evidence and starting from scratch. So they intend to erase their tracks," Richard concluded, "including the contracts that connect my company to them." "Not just that," Sarah added. "Look at the planned date to start Project Phoenix. It's the day after the shareholders' meeting." "We need to stop them," Anna declared, her voice firm. "But you won't go alone." Sarah looked at Michael, years of distrust battling against the urgency of the moment. Finally, she nodded. "If Anna is really in danger, we need to help her. But how can we be sure you're not involved in all this?" Michael took the military medal from his pocket, handing it to Sarah. "Because this medal was a gift from her before everything fell apart. It's the only thing I kept from my past. If I'm lying, you can keep it." Richard observed the exchange, feeling the weight of the decisions they needed to make. Night was approaching, and with it the promise of revelations that could change all their lives. The sun was setting over Central Park, bathing New York City in golden hues, oblivious to the drama unfolding near the lake. Sarah walked along the path, apparently alone, but Michael and Richard maintained a strategic distance, observing every movement. "Are you sure she'll be safe?" Richard whispered through the communicator Michael had provided. "Maintain position," Michael responded, his eyes constantly scanning the environment. "Any suspicious movement, we pull her out immediately." Sarah reached the designated meeting point, a bench near the Bethesda fountain. Her heart was racing, but she maintained the external composure she had learned from watching her father in tense negotiations. She checked her phone, 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled time. From across the park, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows of the trees. Anna, Michael's daughter, approached cautiously. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest as she noticed the resemblance between father and daughter. The same alert posture, the same penetrating gaze. "Sarah," Anna greeted, sitting beside her. "Sorry for the urgency, but I needed to show you this in person." She opened her backpack, pulling out a folder. "I found records of a meeting that will happen in 3 days. All the main players will be present, including your CFO." "Charlie," Sarah murmured, "what else did you find?" "Global Shield isn't just a front company. They have connections with—" Anna stopped abruptly, her eyes widening as she noticed something beyond Sarah's shoulder. Michael noticed it too. "Suspicious movement in Sector 3, he alerted through the communicator. "Richard, stay in position." 3 men were approaching casually, coming from different directions. To an ordinary observer, they would seem like just people enjoying the park. But Michael recognized the coordinated approach pattern. "Sarah," Anna whispered urgently, "we need to leave, now." Before they could move, a 4th man appeared, tall, with graying hair and impeccable military posture. Colonel Xavier in person. "Anna," he smiled, his smooth voice contrasting with the tension of the moment. "Your dedication to following in your father's footsteps is admirable, even if he chose the wrong side of history." "What are you talking about?" Anna asked, confused. "Oh, she doesn't know?" Xavier addressed Sarah. "About how her father betrayed our unit? How he sold information that compromised the entire operation." "Lies!" Michael's voice thundered across the park as he emerged from his hiding place. "Anna, he's lying. He always has been." The shock on Anna's face at seeing her father was palpable. Years of resentment and doubt mixed with the confusion of the present moment. "Dad?" Xavier laughed. "What a touching family reunion. The traitor, his investigative daughter, and the heirs of the Miller Empire. Everything connecting perfectly." Richard also approached, positioning himself next to Sarah. "Enough games, Xavier. We know about the contracts, about Global Shield, about everything." "Do you?" Xavier raised an eyebrow. "Then you know that your father, Richard, was one of our main partners? That your family's fortune was built on operations you can't even imagine?" Sarah held her father's hand, feeling him tense. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is the present and how we're going to fix the mistakes of the past." "Noble sentiment," Xavier commented, "but naive. Some things can't be fixed. Some truths need to remain buried." Michael stepped forward, placing himself between Xavier and the group. "Like the truth about who really betrayed the operation, about how you sold information and used me as a scapegoat." Anna looked between her father and Xavier, years of doubts beginning to dissipate. "The documents I found, the dates didn't match the official story." "But how?" Michael stood up, walking to the window. The city glittered under the night sky, thousands of lights resembling earthly stars. "The meeting is our chance. If we can get concrete evidence of their activities, they'll have no way to escape." "It would be risky," Richard pondered. "Security must be intense." "I have an idea," Sarah said, a determined gleam in her eyes. "Charlie doesn't know we've discovered his involvement. He still thinks he has your trust, Dad." Richard immediately understood. "You want me to attend the meeting?" "Not just that. I want you to request a full presentation of Project Phoenix. As the main shareholder of a partner company, you would have that right." "Meanwhile," Anna completed, "we can use our contacts in the group to monitor all participants. Any suspicious movement we'll know." Michael observed the interaction between the 2 young women with a mixture of pride and concern. They had inherited the best of their parents, Richard's determination, his own persistence in seeking the truth. "There's something else," he said, turning to the group. "Xavier isn't the type to accept defeats easily. After what happened in the park, he must be preparing a counterattack." "I've thought about that," Sarah responded. "That's why we need to act quickly. The more time we take, the more chances they have to destroy evidence." Richard picked up his phone. "I'll call Charlie now. Confirm my presence at the meeting." As Richard made the call, Anna approached her father. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all these years we lost." Michael hugged his daughter, feeling the weight of years of separation dissipating. The important thing is that we're together now, and this time we're going to do the right thing. Together? Sarah observed the scene, a sense of determination growing in her chest. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was more complex and dangerous than any of them could have imagined. Richard ended the call, his face serious. Charlie accepted. The meeting will be at Global Shield's central office on the top floor of the Millennium building. So we have 3 days, Sarah concluded. 3 days to plan how we're going to expose one of the largest corporate corruption networks in the country. The group gathered around the table, beginning to outline their plan. Outside, the city continued its nightly dance of lights and shadows, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that penthouse. But soon, very soon, the secrets hidden in the shadows would be brought to light. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of activity. Richard's apartment transformed into an improvised operations center, with Anna and Sarah working tirelessly on their computers, while Michael and Richard refined every detail of the plan. The Millennium building has 5 different security levels, Michael explained, showing the blueprints he had obtained. The top floor where the meeting will be held is the most protected. Cameras in all corridors, guards at the entrances, and an elevator system that only works with special authorization. Sarah looked up from her laptop. I've gained access to the security cameras through a system vulnerability. I can create a loop of images for 15 minutes, but no more than that without raising suspicion. 15 minutes will be enough, Richard assured. That's the time I need to get the information during the Phoenix Project presentation. Anna, who was analyzing intercepted emails, frowned. There's something strange here. Charlie scheduled a private meeting with Xavier an hour before the main meeting. Michael approached to see the details. In which room? Basement 3 in the technical area. It's a trap, Michael concluded. That area has no cameras. It would be the perfect place for an ambush. Richard sat heavily in an armchair. They must suspect something. Maybe we should abort. No, Sarah interrupted. It's our only chance. If they're going to initiate Project Phoenix the next day, we'll lose all the evidence. Sarah's right, Anna agreed. Besides, I have an idea. What if we use their secret meeting against them? The group gathered around her as she explained her plan. It was risky, but it could work. Michael felt a mix of pride and concern as he watched his daughter demonstrate the same insight he had in his service days. We'll need specific equipment, he commented. Things that aren't easy to get. Leave it to me, Sarah responded. I have contacts who can help, no questions asked. Richard observed the interaction between the 4, marveling at how their lives had become so intricately intertwined. Each brought their own skills and experiences to the mission. Sarah's technical expertise, Anna's contacts, Michael's training, his own influence in the corporate world. There's one more thing, Anna said, her voice serious. I found records of recent transfers. Global Shield is moving large sums to offshore accounts. If we don't act now, all the money will disappear. Sarah approached her father. We need to consider the consequences. When this comes to light, the company's reputation can be rebuilt, Richard interrupted her. The truth is more important. Michael put a hand on Anna's shoulder. Are you sure you want to be part of this? Once we start, there's no turning back. Anna smiled, covering her father's hand with hers. I spent years believing a lie about you. Now it's my chance to help reveal the truth. The group worked late into the night, refining every aspect of the plan. Sarah set up secure communication systems, while Anna organized their evidence. Michael trained Richard in basic observation and evasion techniques, knowledge he hoped he wouldn't need to use. The next morning, the last day before the meeting, they gathered for a silent breakfast. The tension was palpable, each lost in their own thoughts and concerns. Remember, Michael said, breaking the silence, if something goes wrong, your safety is the priority. No evidence is worth the risk. Sarah picked up her coffee cup, studying the dark liquid. You know what's ironic? For years we investigated corrupt companies seeking justice. I never imagined we'd find the answers so close to home. Truth has a peculiar way of revealing itself, Richard commented, looking out the window at the awakening city. Even if it takes years, Anna checked her watch. It's time, we need to make the final preparations. As the group prepared to leave, each heading to their respective tasks for the day, Michael called Sarah aside. "Take care of your father tomorrow," he asked quietly. "He's a good man, but this situation, it's more dangerous than he realizes." Sarah nodded, understanding Michael's concern. "And you take care of Anna. You have a lot of time to make up." Across town in the Global Shield office, Charlie Vaughan was finishing a phone call with Xavier. His face was tense as he looked out the window of his high-rise office. "Is everything prepared for tomorrow?" Xavier asked. "Yes," Charlie responded. "Richard suspects nothing. When he discovers the truth, it will be too late." What Charlie didn't know was that at that very moment, 4 people were about to dismantle his carefully laid plan. The next day promised to be a turning point in the history of all involved, for better or for worse. The Millennium Building cast its imposing shadow over the busy avenue as Richard crossed the main lobby. Dressed in his best suit, he maintained the confident posture of a successful businessman, though his heart raced beneath the professional facade. "Communication tested," Sarah's voice whispered through the tiny device in his ear. Anna confirmed. "Position in the security system." Richard responded with a discreet cough, the agreed signal that he had heard. In the lobby, Charlie was waiting for him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Richard, glad you could make it," the CFO greeted him effusively. "The Phoenix project presentation will be revolutionary for our business. I can't wait to see it," Richard replied, studying the face of the man who had worked alongside him for years, now seeing him in a new light. As they rode up in the private elevator, Sarah monitored everything through the hacked cameras. In a van parked 2 blocks from the building, she and Michael watched every movement through multiple screens. "Anna, how's the access to the basement?" Michael asked through the communicator. "All set, Dad. The sensors are neutralized. No one will notice our little surprise at Xavier's meeting with Charlie." On the 40th floor, Richard was led to an impressive conference room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City stretched to the horizon. Important executives already occupied their places at the polished mahogany table. "Gentlemen," Charlie began, "as you know, Project Phoenix represents a complete restructuring of our operations. With the Miller Company's participation, we can significantly expand our reach." Richard observed those present, recognizing several faces from the past, people who had done business with his father. How many of them knew the true nature of these operations? "The system is working perfectly," Anna informed over the communicator. "Every word is being recorded." The presentation proceeded, with Charlie detailing elaborate corporate restructuring plans. To unsuspecting ears, it seemed like a legitimate business strategy. But Richard perceived the subtext, the veiled references to questionable operations. "And here," Charlie pointed to a complex graph, "we can see how the flow of resources will be optimized through our international subsidiaries." "Money laundering," Sarah murmured in the communicator. "He's describing a money laundering scheme." In the middle of a meeting, Richard raised his hand, playing his part. "Interesting, Charlie, but I wonder about the security of these transactions, considering the problems we've had in the past." Charlie hesitated for a fraction of a second. "All procedures have been carefully planned to ensure maximum discretion." "Discretion or secrecy?" a deep voice interrupted. Colonel Xavier entered the room, his timing perfect as always. "Excuse the delay, gentlemen." Richard felt his stomach churn but maintained his composure. In the communicator, Michael warned, "Stay calm, everything is under control." Xavier took his place at the table, his eyes briefly meeting Richard's. "Please, Charlie, continue. I'm particularly interested in the part about discretion." The presentation continued, but now there was a palpable tension in the air. Richard noticed glances being exchanged between some executives, silent messages being transmitted. "Sarah," he whispered when he had the chance, "I think they suspect." "Just 10 more minutes," she responded. "Anna is almost finished copying all the files." Charlie reached the final part of the presentation, detailing the implementation timeline. Project Phoenix will be initiated tomorrow at first light. All old operations will be terminated and a new cycle will begin. Very convenient, Richard commented, causing some surprised looks. Erasing all traces at once. Xavier leaned forward. Something bothering you, Richard? Just trying to understand the rush, he replied, maintaining a casual tone. It seems like a rather radical move. Sometimes, Xavier smiled. The only way to move forward is to burn bridges. Files copied, Anna announced triumphantly over the communicator. We have everything. But before Richard could respond, Charlie received a message on his cell phone. His face visibly paled. Excuse me, gentlemen, he said, standing up abruptly. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. Xavier also checked his phone, his expression hardening. Richard, why don't you come with me? I think we have some pending matters to discuss. Dad, get out of there now, Sarah ordered over the communicator. They've discovered something. Richard stood up calmly, adjusting his suit. Of course, Colonel. Always good to clarify any doubts. As he followed Xavier out of the room, Richard could feel the weight of the other executives' gazes. The game of appearances was over. Now the real battle was beginning. In the van, Michael was already on the move. Sarah, activate the contingency. Plan. Anna, implement the security protocol. We're not leaving your father alone in this. The afternoon sun bathed New York City in golden tones, oblivious to the drama unfolding high in the Millennium Building. In a few minutes, all involved would discover that some secrets are impossible to contain, no matter how much one tries to bury them. The elevator descended silently, carrying Richard, Xavier, and 2 security guards towards the basement. Through the communicator, he could hear the frantic movement of his team. Keep them talking, Michael instructed. We're on our way. Xavier broke the silence first. You know, Richard, your father was a more pragmatic man. He understood how the world really works. My father also didn't have all the information, Richard responded, keeping his voice steady. Just as I didn't, until recently. The elevator, doors opened on the 3rd basement level, revealing a dimly lit maintenance area. Charlie was already waiting for them, holding a folder. We found this in the archives, he said, extending documents to Xavier. Unauthorized accesses to our system, all traced back to the Miller Company network, Xavier completed. Your daughter is quite skilled with computers, isn't she, Richard? Richard felt his heart rate increase, but maintained his composure. Sarah has always been brilliant, smarter than me in many ways. Like discovering the truth about Operation Guardian, Xavier asked, slowly circling Richard. Or was it Michael who told her? That traitor always had a weakness for lost causes. The only betrayal, a female voice echoed through the space, was against the truth. Anna emerged from the shadows, holding a tablet. On the screen, emails and documents rapidly scrolled. I have here the proof of who really betrayed Operation A. Guardian, including the direct orders you, Xavier, gave to incriminate my father. Charlie took a step forward, but froze upon hearing another voice. I wouldn't do that. Sarah appeared from another corridor, her cell phone in hand. At this moment, all the Project Phoenix files are being transmitted to various journalists and authorities. Xavier laughed, but there was a tremor in his voice. Impressive. The new generation trying to fix the mistakes of the previous one, but you don't understand that some things are bigger than justice. Like profiting from illegal operations? Michael appeared behind Xavier, his presence making the security guards instinctively back away, or using legitimate companies as a front for criminal activities. Michael, Xavier sighed, still trying to be the hero? Look where that led you. Last time. It led me exactly where I needed to be, Michael responded, approaching his daughter. To protect the truth in my family. Richard observed the scene unfold, realizing how each person present represented a different part of the puzzle. Charlie, the ambitious executor, Xavier, the experienced manipulator, Michael and Anna, the victims who refused to remain silenced, Sarah, the digital justice seeker, and himself the heir determined to correct the mistakes of the past. It's over, Xavier, Sarah declared, showing her cell phone. The whole world already knows about Project Phoenix. Your offshore accounts have been identified. There's nowhere left to hide. Charlie looked frantically between Xavier and the exits, clearly calculating his options. "Colonel, maybe we should—" "Silence!" Xavier cut him off. "Nothing is over. You have no idea of the people involved, of the reach we have." "Actually, we do," Anna responded, projecting more documents on her tablet. "Every connection, every transaction, every disguised order, all documented and distributed." Michael stepped forward. "The question now, Xavier, is how you want this to end. We can do this the easy way." The sound of sirens began to echo from outside the building, interrupting his phrase. Xavier briefly closed his eyes, decades of plans crumbling in minutes. "You could have been part of this, Richard," he finally said. "Your father understood the benefits." "My father made mistakes," Richard responded, "but I have the chance to correct them now." Sarah approached her father, showing one last screen on her phone. "The federal police are coming up. All the executives from the meeting are being detained for questioning." Charlie let his folder fall, papers scattering across the floor. His previous arrogance had transformed into pure panic. "Xavier, you said you had everything under control." "And I did," Xavier growled, "until Michael reappeared and gathered this little group of justice seekers." Michael smiled slightly. "Sometimes, Xavier, justice comes from unexpected places, like a reconstituted family and its unlikely connections." The sound of footsteps and voices grew louder, now coming from the stairs. Anna held her father's hand, years of separation dissolving in that moment of triumph. "You know what's ironic?" Sarah commented, looking at Xavier. "If you hadn't tried to silence Michael years ago, maybe your secrets would never have come to light." Richard watched the elevator doors open, revealing federal agents. As Xavier and Charlie were led out, he realized that this wasn't an end, but a beginning. The start of a long process of recovery and reconstruction, both for his company and for the families involved. The days following the operation at the Millennium Building were a whirlwind of testimonies, headlines, and endless meetings. The Miller Company headquarters transformed into a center of frenzied activity, with journalists camped at the entrance, and investigators reviewing every document from the past 20 years. Richard observed the city from the same spot where his father used to stand, the main window of his office on the top floor. The view was the same, but everything had changed. In the glass reflection, he saw Sarah enter silently. "The investigators finished the first phase," she informed, placing a folder on the desk. "The connections with Global Shield were deeper than we imagined." Richard turned to face his daughter. "And the employees? How are they reacting?" "Scared mostly, but also relieved. Many suspected something was wrong, but were afraid to speak up." The door opened again, this time revealing Michael and Anna. In the past weeks, father and daughter had begun the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship. Each conversation, each shared moment, was a small step towards healing. "I just finished my last deposition," Anna announced. "They're especially interested in the documents we found about other involved companies." Michael approached the window, stopping beside Richard. "How are you handling all this?" "Honestly, I'm still processing. Discovering that part of my family's fortune came from questionable activities." Richard sighed. "It's as if my entire legacy is tainted." "A legacy isn't defined only by the past," Sarah interjected, "but also by how we choose to act in the present." Anna sat on the edge of the desk, absently flipping through some papers. "Did you know our investigation group received hundreds of tips after the story broke? Other companies, other executives wanting to clear their consciences?" "A chain reaction," Michael commented. "Sometimes it takes just one person making the right decision to inspire others." Richard walked to his desk, picking up a newspaper. The headline announced, "Businessman exposes international corruption scheme. Miller Empire heir chooses integrity over profit." Maybe this is the real legacy, he reflected. Not the empire built by my father, but the courage to do the right thing, no matter the cost. Sarah rested her hand on her father's shoulder. The company's social projects were never just a facade. We can build on that, transform the company into something that really makes a difference. It's already making a difference, Anna smiled. You can't imagine how many people have reached out wanting to help, wanting to be part of the change. Michael observed the interaction with a discreet smile. His gaze met Richard's, a silent understanding passing between them. Both had sacrificed much, Michael his career and family, Richard his inheritance and reputation. But they had gained something more valuable, peace of mind and the chance to start anew. "I have a proposal," Sarah said, breaking the contemplative moment. "Why don't we transform the social responsibility department into something bigger? An independent institute focused on corporate transparency and ethical practices?" Richard raised his eyebrows. "Are you suggesting we use our experience to help other companies stay on the right path?" "Not just that," Anna added enthusiastically. "We can create a protection network for whistleblowers, offer legal support, ensure that other people don't go through what my father went through." Michael felt his heart tighten at his daughter's words. Years of bitterness and isolation were beginning to transform into something positive, something that could help others. "What do you say?" Sarah looked at each of those present. "A new mission for our unlikely alliance?" Richard couldn't help but smile. Unlikely is an understatement. A businessman, a digital activist, an ex-military man, and an investigative journalist? Sounds like the beginning of a joke, Anna laughed. But it turned out to be the perfect team to expose one of the biggest corruption schemes in the country. Michael approached his daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Not just expose, but also offer an alternative, a better path." "So it's decided?" Sarah asked, her eyes shining with the excitement of a new project. Richard looked once more at the city through the window. Down below, life went on, people coming and going, buildings being constructed, stories unfolding. But now he saw it all with different eyes. "It's decided," he confirmed. "Let's turn this crisis into an opportunity for real change." The group began to discuss details, ideas flowing freely. On Richard's desk, the newspaper with the headline about the scandal now served as a base for notes about a different future. A future built not on secrets and manipulation, but on transparency and integrity. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the New York City sky with shades of orange and pink. It was the end of a day, but also the beginning of something new. Something that had been born from the unlikely union between people who, under other circumstances, would never have met.